Spring 2000. A drug-resistant Campylobacter outbreak tears through Ozark County, Missouri. Farm after farm collapses. 16% of birds gone on average. The farms spending thousands of dollars on antibiotic prevention losing the most, because the bacteria had already evolved past every drug they were using. And then there was Mae Whitaker, 63 years old, 3,000 chickens, 6 weeks of county-wide outbreak, not one bird lost. The pharmaceutical rep who came to sell her antibiotics walked into her laying house and stopped. The birds looked different. The air smelled different. And on her kitchen shelf sat a handwritten notebook from 1910, with a recipe no laboratory had ever tested. Until now, what that recipe contained and what it did nobody in modern science was prepared to explain. The morning of the 3rd of April 2000 came in quietly over Ozark County, Missouri, the kind of quiet that farmers know better than to trust. The redbuds along the fence lines had finally opened, their small magenta blooms catching the early light, and the air carried the particular cool dampness of a Midwest spring that had not yet decided whether it intended to be kind. Mae Whitaker stood at the gate of her laying house at 6:15 in the morning, coffee cup in hand, watching her chickens move through the pale dawn with the same unhurried attention she had given them every morning for 41 years. There were 3,000 of them, Rhode Island Reds, mostly, with a small pen of Plymouth Rocks she kept separately for eggs she sold at the Gainesville Farmers Market on Saturdays. 3,000 birds on 160 acres of rolling Ozark Hill country, the same land her father had farmed and his father before him, the same red clay soil that ran thin over limestone bedrock and required, as every Ozark farmer knew, a particular kind of patience. Mae was 63 years old. She had the posture of a woman 20 years younger and the hands of a woman who had worked every one of her 6 decades. Her gray hair was pulled back under a seed cap that read Purina Poultry in faded blue letters, and her rubber boots left the same prints in the morning mud they had left for 4 decades. She counted the birds the way she always did, not by number but by movement, by the quality of the flock's collective energy. A healthy flock moves like water. She had learned from her grandmother Dottie, who had learned it from her own grandmother Clara before her. It ripples and eddies and finds its own level. A sick flock moves like sand, slow, heavy, stopping in places where it should not stop. This morning the birds moved like water, and Mae let out a breath she had not known she was holding. She had reason to be watchful. In the past 3 weeks, something had begun moving through Ozark County's poultry operations with the efficiency of bad news. It had started at the Henderson's place 12 miles north, where Gary Henderson had lost 60 birds in 4 days to what the veterinarian identified as Campylobacter jejuni, a bacterial pathogen that had been a manageable nuisance in commercial poultry operations for decades but had, in the late 1990s, begun behaving differently. It had begun resisting the antibiotics that were supposed to stop it. By April 3rd, the outbreak had touched 7 farms in Ozark County. The collective loss stood at approximately 1,400 birds, an average of 11% per affected flock, with Gary Henderson's operation losing 19% before the pathogen's advance slowed. The Missouri Department of Agriculture had issued an advisory. The county extension office had held an emergency meeting at the Gainesville Community Center on the last Tuesday of March, attended by 43 farmers sitting in folding chairs under fluorescent lights, listening to a man from the state capitol explain that the situation was under control. Mae had attended. She had sat in the 3rd row, listened carefully, and said nothing. On the drive home, she had stopped at the Casey's General Store on Route 5, bought a cup of coffee she did not need, and stood at the counter for a moment looking at nothing in particular. Then she had driven the remaining 8 miles home, gone into the barn, and checked the drinking water lines in all 4 laying houses. The garlic was fresh. The oregano was at the right concentration. The apple cider vinegar registered the right acidity on the strip she kept hanging by the door. She went inside, ate supper, and slept without difficulty. What Mae was checking, each time she walked those water lines, was a preparation her family had been making for at least 4 generations, a mixture she had first learned to make as a girl, standing beside her grandmother Dottie in this same barn, watching Dottie's hands move through the process with the practiced ease of something done so many times it had become as natural as breathing. She had not thought of it as unusual then. She did not think of it as unusual now. It was simply what you did. The preparation began with raw apple cider vinegar brags, unfiltered, with the live cultures visible as a thin haze in the bottle. 12 ounces per 100 gallons of drinking water, added first, acidifying the supply to approximately pH 4.2 to 4.6. Then, fresh garlic, pressed through cloth rather than chopped. The pressing released allicin, the sulfur compound that gave garlic its smell and much of its biological activity. 4 ounces of the pressed juice per 100 gallons. Then, dried oregano leaf, steeped overnight in warm water to draw out the aromatic oils, and strained before use 3 ounces per 100 gallons. And finally, fresh thyme, prepared the same way 2 ounces per 100 gallons. Added last, so the volatile compounds had less time to evaporate before reaching the birds. The full preparation went into the water lines 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday throughout the year, with the frequency increased to daily during periods of documented disease pressure in the region. Clara had written, in the notebook Mae kept on her office shelf, that the formula tasted agreeable to the birds, and that consumption did not decrease when it was introduced. Mae's own 41 years of records confirmed this. Water consumption on treatment days ran within 3% of consumption on non-treatment days. The preparation cost, in the spring of 2000, approximately 67 cents per 100 birds per treatment day. For a 3,000-bird flock on a 3-day-per-week schedule, that came to roughly $943 a year. Mae knew this number precisely because she had calculated it 3 years earlier, when a representative from a different company had made a similar presentation at her gate. She kept the calculation in the front of her current notebook, where she could find it easily. The man from Elanco Animal Health arrived on the morning of April 7th. His name was Dr. Alan Pierce, and he was 39 years old, with the particular confidence of someone who had been right about most things in his professional life and had come to assume, reasonably enough, that this pattern would continue. He drove a company phone 150 inches, Elanco blue, had a laptop bag over his shoulder, and a rolling cooler in the truck bed that contained sample vials of tylosin tartrate and enrofloxacin, and printed clinical data on their efficacy against Campylobacter jejuni in commercial poultry operations. He had visited 4 farms in Ozark County in the previous 2 days. At 3 of them, he had left behind signed distribution agreements. He introduced himself at Mae's gate with a handshake that was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone trained to calibrate his presentation to the farmer in front of him. He was polite. He called her Mrs. Whitaker. He had done his research. He knew her flock size, her acreage, her operation type. He did not condescend, which Mae noticed and appreciated even as she recognized it as a professional technique. "I appreciate you stopping by," Mae said. "Come in and have coffee." They sat at the kitchen table. The table was old dark oak, scarred from generations of use, and on it, next to the salt and pepper shakers, sat a small spiral notebook in which Mae recorded her daily observations. Water consumption per house, feed consumption, egg production numbers, bird behavior notes. Dr. Pierce glanced at it but did not ask about it. He opened his laptop and began his presentation. The data was good, Mae could see that immediately. Elanco's research on tylosin tartrate showed a 73% reduction in Campylobacter colonization rates in broiler flocks over a 28-day prophylactic treatment cycle. The enrofloxacin data showed faster results, measurable reductions in pathogen load within 72 hours of treatment initiation. The cost per bird was manageable, he explained. For a 3,000 bird operation like hers, the monthly expenditure would run approximately $380 to $420, depending on the treatment protocol she chose. That worked out to between $4,560 and $5,040 annually. "You haven't lost any birds yet," he said. "This is exactly the right time to start. Prophylactic treatment before exposure is 3 times more effective than treatment after infection is established." Mae looked at the data on his screen for a long moment. Then she looked up. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. The farms that have lost birds in this county, Henderson's, the Kowalski place, the Tanner operation, were they using antibiotic prophylaxis before the outbreak?" Dr. Pierce paused. It was a short pause, but Mae caught it. "Most commercial operations in the region do use some form of preventive antibiotic protocol," he said. "That's not what I asked," Mae said, not unkindly. He closed his laptop slightly. "Some of them were, yes." "All right," Mae said. She refilled both their coffee cups. "Let me show you something." Mae led him through the kitchen and into the small room off the back hallway that she called the farm office. One wall held filing cabinets, another held bookshelves, agricultural extension bulletins, old USDA yearbooks, a row of worn field guides. And on the bottom shelf, arranged in order of age, sat a collection of notebooks and journals representing 41 years of her own observations, and before that, the records of the women who had farmed this land and land like it before her. She did not reach for her own notebooks. She reached for the oldest thing on the shelf, a small cloth-bound book, its cover faded from what had once been dark blue to a pale, uncertain gray. She handled it with the practiced care of someone accustomed to fragile things. "My great-great-grandmother Clara Whitaker," she said, setting it on the desk between them. She started keeping this in 1910 on a farm in Harlan County, Kentucky, Appalachian farm. Her family had chickens going back before the Civil War. Dr. Pierce leaned forward to look at it. The handwriting inside was small and precise, in the particular style of women who had learned penmanship before typewriters made the skill seem optional. The ink had faded to a warm brown. Some pages were water-stained at the corners, but the text was legible, and Mae, who had read it so many times she could recite portions from memory, translated quietly as she turned pages. Clara Whitaker had written, "In the spring of 1910, the hens that drink from the garlic water do not take sick with the summer fever that kills the neighbors' flocks. I do not know the reason of it, but I know the fact of it, and that is enough. Grandmama Etta showed me the same when I was small. She said it best in the old way." Below that line, in a different hand and darker ink, the handwriting of the woman Clara called Grandmama Etta, were 2 sentences written in a language that looked like Welsh. Mae's grandmother had translated them long ago, and Mae had memorized the translation the way you memorize something that feels important before you fully understand why. Antibiotics kill your enemy today and create a stronger enemy for tomorrow. Herbs don't kill, they make your chicken strong enough to win on its own. Dr. Pierce looked up from the page. "Etta wrote that in 1910. She wrote it before 1910, Mae said. Clara copied it from an older document when she started this notebook. Etta's original writing was older than that." She paused. "We don't know exactly how old. The family memory goes back to Wales, but the written records only go back to Clara." "That's a sophisticated distinction," he said finally, "between killing the pathogen and strengthening the host." "Etta was a sophisticated woman," Mae said. "She just didn't have a laboratory." The formula recorded in Clara's notebook was not complicated, but its simplicity was deceptive. The ratios were precise. The preparation method was specific. Clara had noted that the vinegar must be unpasteurized. She did not explain why, only that the clear kind did not work as well. She had noted that the garlic must be pressed, not chopped, and used within 2 hours of pressing. And she had noted this was the detail Mae had come to consider most important, that the oregano and thyme together worked better than either alone, and that both together with the vinegar and garlic produced results that none of the 4 produced separately. Dr. Pierce sat with the notebook open in front of him for a long time. He was a scientist before he was a salesman, and the thing Mae saw working behind his eyes was not calculation but genuine curiosity, the kind that cannot be manufactured for professional purposes. When he finally spoke, he asked not about the cost or the logistics but about the mechanism. "What are you proposing is actually happening?" he said. "If your herbs aren't killing the Campylobacter, and I'm not saying they are or aren't, I'm saying if, then what are they doing?" Mae reached for a folder on the shelf and set it on the table between them. Inside were photocopied pages from a 1,997 paper in Poultry Science on the immune-stimulating effects of garlic extract in broilers, and a 1,998 review from the Journal of Applied Microbiology on the antimicrobial properties of phenolic compounds in plant essential oils. "The garlic research is the clearest," she said. "Allicin, the active compound in garlic, produced when the cells are crushed, has demonstrated inhibition of Campylobacter jejuni growth at concentrations achievable in drinking water. But more importantly, the same research shows immunomodulatory effects, increased macrophage activity, better antibody responses. The birds fight infection more effectively, not just avoid exposure. And the oregano? Carvacrol and thymol, the phenolic compounds in oregano and thyme essential oils. They disrupt bacterial cell membranes, they integrate into the lipid bilayer, destabilize it, cause leakage of intracellular contents. The bacteria die because their membrane fails, not because a specific protein target has been blocked." She paused and looked at him steadily. "Here is the key distinction your data doesn't address. A bacterium can mutate a target protein, so an antibiotic can no longer bind to it. That's how fluoroquinolone resistance develops one-point mutation in the GyrA gene, and the whole drug class becomes useless. But you cannot mutate your way out of a compound that attacks the physical integrity of your cell wall. The resistance pathway is blocked by the mechanism itself." Dr. Pierce was quiet for a moment. "That's the current thinking in the essential oils research literature," he said carefully. "I know," Mae said. "I've been following it since 1994. She turned to the next page. "The apple cider vinegar works differently again. The acidity pH 4.2 to 4.6 creates an environment that Campylobacter finds difficult to colonize. The bacteria prefer neutral to slightly alkaline conditions. The vinegar doesn't kill them directly. It makes the gastrointestinal environment inhospitable before they can establish themselves. 3 mechanisms," he said, "working on 3 different pathways." "Clara's grandmother figured that out without naming any of them," Mae said. "She just knew that together they worked better than any one alone." Dr. Pierce closed his laptop entirely. "Can I see the laying houses?" he said. They walked the farm together for 2 hours. Dr. Pierce had spent 11 years evaluating poultry operations across a 6-state region. He understood healthy birds. He walked the length of the main laying house, 140 feet of Rhode Island Reds in tiered cages, the ventilation fans running at their early April setting, the morning light coming through the east-facing windows. And he looked at the birds the way a person looks at something that is telling them something they did not expect to hear. The feather condition was exceptional. Commercial laying hens at this density frequently showed feather loss on the back and neck, a consequence of stress, crowding, and the nutritional depletion of high-production laying cycles. Mae's birds showed no feather loss. Their combs were red and upright. Their eyes were clear. They moved with the easy alertness of animals not carrying any pathogenic burden. He checked the watering cups clean, flowing properly, no biofilm on the surfaces. He picked up several birds for handling assessment and found them heavy, well-muscled, with no signs of respiratory distress. "What's your egg production rate?" he asked. "Over the past 12 months, 94.2%, Mae said. Eggs per hen per day as a percentage of theoretical maximum. The industry average ran 78 to 82%. He said nothing and wrote the number down. "Your feed conversion ratio?" 2.1 pounds of feed per pound of eggs produced, averaged across the flock. The industry standard ran 2.4 to 2.6. Mae's ratio suggested birds that were either exceptionally efficient or exceptionally healthy, and he was beginning to think that in this case, those were the same thing. He stood in the middle of the laying house for a long time, without speaking. The sounds of the house settled around them, the low murmur of the flock, the hum of the ventilation fans, the occasional mechanical sound of the feed conveyor. Then he said quietly, "How long has your family been using this preparation?" "Since I took over the farm in 1968, Mae said. "My mother before me from 1944. My grandmother Dottie from 1931, when the family came from Kentucky. Clara from at least 1910, and before that, Etta, who learned it from someone before her, in Wales. 90 years of continuous empirical observation," he said. "At minimum," Mae said. He looked at the birds for another long moment. Then he looked at Mae. "I'm not going to leave you a distribution agreement," he said. "I know," Mae said. "Would you like more coffee?" By the second week of May 2000, the Campylobacter outbreak in Ozark County had reached its peak severity. 15 farms were affected. The collective loss stood at 4,847 birds, an average mortality of 16.3% across affected operations. 3 farms exceeded 25% mortality. One 5,000-bird commercial operation in Springfield lost 31% of its flock before the outbreak was finally checked by switching to tylosin tartrate, though the state veterinary laboratory noted in its June report that tylosin resistance in the isolated strains was already measurable at low levels. The 7 farms that had been using fluoroquinolone-based prophylaxis prior to the outbreak fared the worst. Their average mortality was 22.4% worse than the outbreak average, worse than farms that had used no antibiotic prophylaxis at all. The resistant strain, shaped by years of antibiotic selection pressure, moved through their flocks with a particular efficiency, finding no barrier where a barrier had been assumed to exist. The farms that had spent the most on prevention suffered the worst outcomes. The prophylaxis had not merely failed, it had made failure more likely by cultivating the very resistance it was meant to prevent. Mae Whitaker's farm was not among the affected operations. Not one bird died of Campylobacter infection on her 160 acres across the entire 6-week outbreak period. The Missouri Department of Agriculture's tracking data, which Mae had requested under the state's public records provisions, confirmed it across 16 monitored farms. Her operation and one 12-bird hobby flock were the only 2 that reported 0 pathogen-attributable mortality. 3,000 birds. Continuous exposure. 6 weeks. 0 losses. Dr. Pierce called on May 18th. "I'd like to bring someone to your farm," he said. "A researcher." "If you're willing." "Who?" Mae asked. "Her name is Dr. Sandra Okafor. She's a microbiologist at the University of Missouri. She studies antimicrobial resistance in food animal pathogens. I've known her for 6 years. She's the best scientist I know." He paused. "I told her what I saw in your laying houses. She wants to understand it properly." "All right," Mae said. "Bring her." Dr. Sandra Okafor arrived on a Tuesday in late May. She was 44 years old, compact and precise in her movements, with the particular stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time observing things carefully. She came with equipment: sterile swabs, sample containers, a portable pH meter, a small centrifuge she set up on Mae's kitchen table with practiced efficiency. She spent 3 hours in the laying houses taking water samples, cloacal swabs from randomly selected birds, and environmental samples from the floor and watering equipment surfaces. She measured the pH of Mae's treated water at 4.31. She tasted it herself, a thing that surprised Mae, who had not expected a university microbiologist to put a chicken waterer to her lips, and nodded once, as if confirming something she had already suspected. Then she sat at the kitchen table and read Clara's notebook for a long time without speaking. "Can I ask about the preparation process?" she said finally. Mae walked her through it step by step, the ratios, the method, the schedule, the seasonal adjustments. Dr. Okafor asked questions Mae had never been asked before: the temperature of the water used to steep the oregano and thyme, the exact duration of steeping, whether Mae used fresh or dried garlic, the brand of apple cider vinegar. "You use Bragg's," Dr. Okafor said, looking at the bottle on the shelf. "Unfiltered." "With the mother," Mae confirmed. Clara specified unpasteurized. "I tried pasteurized for one season. The birds didn't do as well." "The live cultures," Dr. Okafor said, almost to herself. "Acetic acid bacteria. They may be producing additional organic acids during digestion that the pasteurized product can't generate a symbiotic effect. The probiotic and the prebiotic acidity working together." She wrote for a moment, then looked up at the notebook. "What language is this passage?" "Welsh, we think," Mae said, "or something carried from Wales." Dr. Okafor read the 2 lines slowly. "Antibiotics kill your enemy today and create a stronger enemy for tomorrow. Herbs don't kill, they make your chicken strong enough to win on its own." She set the notebook down. "That's the distinction between bactericidal and immunomodulatory action," she said quietly, written in a margin note. Before the germ theory of disease was widely understood, Etta understood something, Mae said. She just didn't have the vocabulary for it. Most of the best observations in the history of medicine were made by people who didn't have the vocabulary yet, Dr. Okafor said. The vocabulary came later. The observation was always first. The laboratory results came back 3 weeks after Dr. Okafor's visit. She drove out to the farm to deliver them in person, and Mae understood from this that the results were significant enough to warrant the 4-hour round trip. The treated water showed allicin at 0.43 milligrams per liter within the range, documented in the literature as inhibitory to Campylobacter jejuni growth. Carvacrol measured at 0.31 milligrams per liter, thymol at 0.18 milligrams per liter. Together they exceeded the combined minimum inhibitory threshold for Campylobacter jejuni established across multiple published studies. Mae listened to each number and said nothing. She had not known these numbers before. She had known only that the preparation worked. Then Dr. Okafor opened to the second page. The cloacal swabs from Mae's birds showed Campylobacter colonization in 2 of 40 randomly sampled animals, a 5% colonization rate. Concurrent sampling at 3 affected farms in the county that same week showed colonization rates of 68, 74, and 81% respectively. Mae read the page twice. Then she set it on the table and folded her hands. "What does this mean?" she asked. Not because she did not understand the numbers, but because she wanted to hear Dr. Okafor say it plainly. "It means," Dr. Okafor said, "that your birds are living in a fundamentally different microbial environment than the farms around you. The active compounds in your preparation are present in sufficient concentrations to inhibit Campylobacter colonization. The colonization data confirms what the compound concentrations predict." She paused. "I want to be careful about what I claim. This is one farm, one outbreak, observational data without controls. But every measurement points the same direction. The water chemistry, the compound concentrations, the colonization rates, the mortality outcomes, all of them consistent with each other." "What direction?" Mae asked. "That Clara's grandmother," Dr. Okafor said, "was right. The controlled trial ran from October 2001 through September 2003. Dr. Okafor designed it with a colleague from the university's Animal Science Department, Dr. Marcus Webb, a careful, methodologically conservative researcher who had been skeptical of the project from the beginning and whose skepticism Mae had come to respect precisely because it was honest and because it produced better science. 10 farms participated across Ozark and Douglas counties, selected for comparable flock size, housing type, and management practices. 5 continued their existing protocols, 3 using antibiotic prophylaxis, 2 using no supplementation of any kind. 5 implemented Mae's preparation under Dr. Okafor's supervision, following the exact protocol documented in Clara's notebook. Fresh garlic pressed through cloth. Oregano and thyme steeped overnight and strained. Bragg's unfiltered apple cider vinegar. No substitutions, no shortcuts. Mae consulted on the preparation process for all 5 treatment farms. She visited each one, inspected the watering systems, helped calibrate the mixing chambers, and spent time with each farmer explaining not just the ratios but the reasoning why the vinegar had to be unfiltered, why the garlic had to be pressed and used within 2 hours, why both oregano and thyme together worked better than either alone. She was not teaching from a manual. She was teaching the way Dottie had taught her, and the way Clara had presumably taught Dottie from accumulated observation, from knowing what happened when the instructions were not followed exactly. The county experienced one additional significant Campylobacter event during the trial period, a smaller outbreak in the summer of 2002. 3 trial farms were affected, 2 from the antibiotic prophylaxis group and 1 from the untreated control group. None of the 5 treatment farms reported a Campylobacter attributable mortality event. The full results, published in the Journal of Applied Poultry Research in October 2004, were as follows. Annual mortality from gastrointestinal pathogens across the 5 treatment farms averaged 0.87% per year. The antibiotic prophylaxis farms averaged 3.2%. The untreated farms averaged 4.9%. Campylobacter cecal colonization rates, sampled quarterly, averaged 7.3% across treatment farms versus 61.4% on antibiotic prophylaxis farms and 58.8% on untreated farms. That last finding was the one that stopped Dr. Marcus Webb, the skeptic, in his tracks. Antibiotic prophylaxis produced colonization rates statistically indistinguishable from no treatment at all, while the herbal preparation reduced colonization to near negligible levels. He wrote in his contribution to the paper that the data suggests that antibiotic prophylaxis in this context may be providing economic cost without commensurate pathogen protection, while herbal supplementation at the documented concentrations provides measurable protection through mechanisms not subject to the resistance dynamics observed in antibiotic-treated populations. It was the most academic way Mae had ever seen someone say that ETA had been right. The paper cited Mae's 41-year mortality records as the longest continuous dataset on small flock poultry health associated with a consistent herbal supplementation protocol in the American literature. It cited Clara's 1,910 notebook as the earliest documented record of the practice. And in the acknowledgments, after the names of the university departments and the funding bodies, it said simply, "The authors thank Mae Whitaker, whose records made this study possible, and Clara Whitaker, whose observations made Mae's records necessary." The FDA had been watching the fluoroquinolone resistance trajectory since the NARMS data first showed the trend in 1998. The numbers moved in one direction only. Fluoroquinolone resistance in Campylobacter isolates from poultry ran 13% in 1999, 17% in 2000, and the curve was not flattening. In 2005, the agency withdrew approval for enrofloxacin in poultry production, a decision that took 4 years of regulatory process and considerable industry opposition to reach, but that the resistance data made unavoidable in the end. Dr. James Thornton, a veterinary pharmacologist in the FDA's Office of Minor Use and Minor Species, found Dr. Okafor's 2004 paper while compiling literature on natural alternatives to antibiotic prophylaxis. He called Dr. Okafor in March 2005. He called Mae that July. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that your data is going into our 2006 guidance document on alternatives to antibiotic prophylaxis in poultry production." Mae was quiet for a moment. "Clara will be pleased," she said. Dr. Thornton had read the paper carefully. He knew exactly who Clara was. I imagine she would be, he said. The 2006 guidance document cited the Ozark County trial as a model for evidence-based natural supplementation protocols. It did not constitute a formal endorsement. The FDA's regulatory framework does not work that way, but it placed Mae's preparation, and the science behind it, into the official literature that shaped how the agency and the industry approach the antibiotic resistance problem going forward. Dr. Alan Pierce left Elanco Animal Health in 2003. He had spent 3 years thinking about what he had seen: the kitchen table, the resistance data, Dr. Okafor's colonization numbers, the feather condition of Mae's Rhode Island Reds. He enrolled in a master's program in agricultural policy at the University of Missouri that fall. His thesis, completed in 2005, was titled Prophylactic Antibiotic Use in Commercial Poultry Production, Economic Incentives, Resistance Outcomes, and the Case for Evidence-Based Natural Alternatives. Mae served as one of his thesis interviews. He drove out to Ozark County on a cold February morning and sat at the same kitchen table he had sat at 5 years earlier. The oak had not changed. The seed cap on Mae's head was new Missouri Extension Service now, but the hands wrapped around the coffee cup were the same hands. "I've been thinking about something since 2000, he said. "About the question you asked me that morning. About whether the Hendersons were using antibiotic prophylaxis," Mae said. "You knew the answer before you asked it." "I thought I knew," Mae said. "I needed you to confirm it." He nodded. "The thing I couldn't get past, after I walked your laying houses that day, was the feather condition. You don't get feather condition like that from birds carrying pathogenic stress. I've walked maybe 400 poultry operations in 11 years. I've never seen a flock that looked like yours. The herbs don't make them feel better," Mae said slowly. "That's not quite the right way to put it. They make the birds intact. They make them able to be who they are, without the constant low-grade burden of managing a pathogenic load." She picked up her coffee cup. Clara said, "The garlic water didn't cure the sick chicken. It made the healthy chicken hard to make sick. There's a difference." Dr. Pierce wrote that down. The sentence appeared, nearly verbatim, in his thesis conclusion. His thesis was cited in 3 subsequent peer-reviewed papers on antibiotic-free poultry management between 2006 and 2012. One of those papers was read by a researcher at Iowa State University, who incorporated its findings into a graduate seminar on antimicrobial resistance and livestock production. The knowledge moved the way knowledge moves, not in a straight line, but outward in all directions, finding the people who needed it. By 2024, the scientific literature on oregano oil and Campylobacter had grown large enough that Clara Whitaker could not have imagined it, though she would not have been surprised by its conclusions. A September 2024 study in Veterinary Medicine and Science evaluated oregano supplementation in broiler feed and water, and found reductions in Campylobacter cecal load of 61 to 78%, compared to untreated control groups, with no measurable resistance development observed across the study period. The mechanism was membrane disruption via carvacrol and thymol, described by the study's authors as having an intrinsically low resistance induction potential due to its non-specific, multi-target mode of action. This was what Dr. Okafor had described to Mae in her kitchen in 2000. This was what Etta had said in 1910, without those words. A February 2025 paper in Avian Diseases specifically evaluated the combination of oregano oil and apple cider vinegar in poultry drinking water and found that together they achieved greater Campylobacter inhibition than either compound alone. The authors identified a synergistic relationship. The acidity of the vinegar compromised bacterial membrane integrity, making the carvacrol and thymol more effective at lower concentrations. This was the synergy that Clara had recorded without naming in 1910, her observation that both together worked better than either, separately verified 115 years later by controlled trial with mass Spectrometry analysis. The paper cited Mae's 2004 trial data in a footnote. A January 2026 review synthesized 94 published studies and concluded that thyme, oregano, cinnamon, coriander, and basil essential oils all demonstrated significant anti-Campylobacter effects in both laboratory and live animal models, with carvacrol and thymol identified as the most consistently active compounds. The review described essential oils as a promising class of natural antimicrobials, with strong potential to contribute to the reduction of antibiotic use in poultry production globally. 94 studies, to arrive at what Etta had written in the margin of a notebook. In 2021, a small agricultural biotechnology company in Springfield, Missouri, Ozark Biopharm Solutions, filed a patent application for a standardized poultry water additive formulation based on the preparation documented in Mae's 2004 trial. The application cited Mae Whitaker's historical records and Clara's 1910 notebook as prior art. At Mae's insistence, and with the company's agreement, the licensing structure included a provision directing 15% of commercial royalty revenue to a scholarship fund at the University of Missouri for students pursuing research in antibiotic-free livestock management. The patent was granted in 2023. The product, branded Herbal Guard Poultry Water Supplement, entered commercial distribution in 14 states in early 2024. The label listed 4 active ingredients: apple cider vinegar, garlic extract, oregano oil, thyme oil. The ratios were Clara's ratios. Mae Whitaker was 87 years old when the patent was granted. She read the approval letter at the same kitchen table where Dr. Pierce had opened his laptop 23 years before. She read it twice. Then she set it down, put on her rubber boots, and walked out to the laying house to do the morning count. Dr. Pierce came back one more time. It was October 2024, and he was 63 years old, retired, spending most of his time reading and thinking and occasionally driving long distances to see people he had been meaning to see for years. He drove 4 hours from Columbia for no reason he would have been comfortable explaining, but that felt necessary nonetheless. He found Mae in the laying house, not doing the morning count. The morning was long past, but simply standing in the middle aisle, the way she had stood when he walked it with her 24 years before. She moved more carefully than she had then. The quality of her attention had not changed at all. "The January 2026 review," he said, after they had greeted each other. 94 studies. I read the advance copy online last month. They all say what Etta said. Good, Mae said. The 2025 paper, the synergistic effect of oregano and apple cider vinegar together. He paused. That's what you've been doing since 1968. Both together, exactly as Clara wrote. Clara wrote it because Etta told her, Mae said. And Etta knew because someone before her had watched long enough to see what happened when you used them separately and what happened when you used them together. The observation came first, he said. The science came after. It always does, Mae said. They stood together in the laying house for a while without speaking. The Rhode Island Reds moved around them with the unhurried ease of healthy birds. The ventilation fans hummed. The afternoon light came through the west-facing windows at the angle that Mae had noted. In her first notebook entry in 1968, made the birds brightest-eyed. "Can I ask you something?" "Doctor," Pierce said. "You can always ask," Mae said. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said yes that morning? Signed the distribution agreement?" Mae was quiet for a moment. "I think about the birds," she said. "I think about what the resistant strain would have done to them if they'd had no real defense." She paused. "I think about Clara, and what she would have made of it. She wouldn't have been angry. She would have said, 'Well, now you know. The knowledge is still here. Try it properly this time.'" She turned to look at him. "That's the thing about this kind of knowledge. It doesn't argue. It doesn't insist. It just waits. It waited through the whole century when nobody was listening. And it was still there when someone finally paid attention. He thought about that for a long moment. "Etta said it better," he said quietly. "Herbs don't kill. They make the chicken strong enough to win on its own." "She did," Mae said. "She always did." He looked at the birds for another moment. Then quietly, 94 studies. To confirm a margin note. "Science takes the time it takes," Mae said. And then, because she was 87 years old and had earned the right to be direct. But the chickens didn't wait for the studies. The chickens were fine the whole time. She moved toward the gate at the end of the aisle, walking slowly but without hesitation, her rubber boots leaving the same prints in the same clean bedding they had left for 56 years. At the gate she paused and looked back at the flock for a moment, counting not by number but by movement, by the quality of the collective energy. The birds moved like water. She opened the gate and walked through it into the afternoon. Dr. Pierce stood where she had left him, in the middle of the house, surrounded by 3,000 birds that did not know they were evidence of anything, that knew only the clean water and the ordinary contentment of animals in good health. Behind Mae, in the kitchen, on the bottom shelf of the farm office bookcase, Clara's cloth-bound journal waited in its faded gray cover patient as it had always been, its small brown handwriting unchanged by any of the decades that had passed since a woman in Harlan County, Kentucky, sat down to record what her grandmother had shown her. The writing did not age. The knowledge did not diminish. It sat on the shelf and waited, the way it had always waited, for the next person who needed to understand what Etta had already known. Some things do not need the science to arrive in order to be true. The science only makes them easier to explain to the people who haven't been watching long enough.